Millions tuned in expecting a typical interview, but within moments, it became clear that Meghan Markle and George Stephanopoulos weren't just exchanging questions. They were circling each other like predators. No script, no filters, no mercy. What followed was a live television clash that producers hoped for, but PR teams dread. By the end, one thing was undeniable. Someone had lost control of the narrative, and it wasn't George. The studio, despite its warm lights and glowing skyline, felt off, as if the air was holding its breath. Nervous whispers from producers, camera operators adjusting already perfect lenses, and a floor manager fidgeting with his headset made it clear something was about to derail. And then, the sound of footsteps, measured and confident, echoed across the floor like the first notes of a warning. Meghan Markle entered, her calm, almost unnerving. In her flawless black suit, perfect posture, and unreadable gaze, she was a study in control. George Stephanopoulos rose to meet her with a smile, warm but cautious. This wasn't about charm, it was reconnaissance. "Good morning," he said, and Meghan returned with a camera-ready smile, the kind that meant everything in photos and nothing in person. They sat, and the crew went silent as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1, red light. Instantly, the room's atmosphere shifted. George's first question was soft, but sharp enough for Meghan to feel its edge. She straightened subtly, her body language shifting from relaxed to defensive. And in that brief moment, the interview transformed into a duel. Her response was smooth, but her tone carried the first hint of coldness. George leaned in, eyes narrowing with curiosity, and Meghan matched him, softening her voice even as her guard rose. To the casual observer, the exchange seemed polite, civil, even warm. But those paying close attention could see the tension. It wasn't an interview, it was a battle. Barely 90 seconds in, the viewers began to sense what the crew already knew. This wasn't going to be just another interview. As the red light blinked on, George went straight for the jugular. "You've spoken a lot about reclaiming your story, but do you ever worry that in shaping your version, you've blurred the line between personal truth and public reality?" Meghan's smile froze, her composure intact but unmistakably strained. She responded, cool and controlled. "I think the real problem, George, is that too many people mistake headlines for reality. My experience is my reality. Whether the public accepts it or not, that's not my responsibility." George remained calm but pressed. "When your truth impacts real people, with names and reputations, don't you think clarity becomes a responsibility?" Meghan's eyes sharpened. "Clarity exists," she said coolly. "It's just often ignored when a different narrative sells better." The first crack appeared. George leaned back, folding his hands, observing her with a practiced gaze. "So you're saying the public has it wrong?" he asked. Meghan's response was a soft, humorless laugh. "The public is fed what the press wants them to swallow. People believe what they're told to believe." George's eyebrow lifted slightly, signaling a shift from curiosity to confrontation. "Some would argue," he said carefully, "that you've also told the public what to believe, through interviews, books, shows, documentaries." Meghan's lips tightened. "Sharing my experience isn't manipulation," she said firmly. "It's defending myself." George's voice grew quieter, sharper. "But every defense tells a story, Meghan, and every story leaves out something. What do you think people feel you've left out?" The temperature in the studio dropped, and the cameras seemed to lean in. Meghan's response was slow and measured. "People feel whatever they're told to feel," she said, "but I'm not here to babysit public perception." The words landed heavily, without drama but with a cold finality. George nodded, his posture shifting slightly, signaling his next move. "All right then, let's talk about the parts you haven't shared." Meghan's eyes narrowed, the first sign of tension. The interview had officially crossed into combative territory, and viewers could feel the change. George's next question wasn't written down. It was calculated in real time. You've said the institution failed you, but what about the people who supported you? The ones who welcomed you, defended you, believed in you? Do you ever worry you walked away from them too? The question, though wrapped in soft language, hit like a razor. Meghan's posture stiffened. People can welcome you with one hand and wound you with the other, she replied. I don't owe loyalty to anyone who buys into lies about me. The tension grew. But the lies aren't the only narrative people saw, George said. There were moments, very public moments, where your own actions raised questions. Your interviews, your statements, your portrayals of events that others involved say were exaggerated or incomplete. Does the possibility of misrepresentation concern you? For the first time, Meghan paused before answering. No, she said, her tone chilling, because I lived my experience. I don't need anyone else to validate it. George nodded, then pushed further. But when your experience challenges the reputations of people who can't publicly respond, doesn't that put you in a position of unchecked power? Meghan blinked, incredulous. Do you honestly think I have more power than an entire monarchy? George didn't flinch. In the media, in the narrative, sometimes yes. A ripple of shock ran through the control room. Meghan's jaw clenched. She leaned forward, no longer warm but cold, poised and tense. So, let me understand this, she said. You're suggesting that telling my story is somehow oppressive, that speaking about pain is an abuse of power? George held her gaze. I'm suggesting, he replied gently, that when a story becomes a brand, it becomes difficult to tell where the truth ends and strategy begins. Meghan's composure cracked, just a flicker of fury beneath her poise. You think I'm strategic? She asked, her voice low and accusing. George folded his hands, his response cool. I think you're media savvy, sometimes brilliantly so. Meghan leaned back, her breath slow and deliberate. And you're implying that's a flaw? George shook his head once. I'm implying, he said calmly, that it raises questions you rarely allow people to ask. Meghan's lips tightened. Maybe people don't ask, she said, because they're too afraid of being labeled cruel or biased. Maybe you're the only one comfortable enough to take that risk. George didn't change his expression, but his eyes acknowledged the hit. I don't mind taking the risk, he said quietly. Truth is worth the discomfort. Meghan's jaw set. Whose truth? She whispered. George didn't hesitate. The one that survived scrutiny. The duel had left the surface. They weren't circling anymore. They were striking. The studio had become a courtroom without rules, and neither was willing to retreat. Meghan knew it, sensing the shift as George discarded his note cards completely. Let's talk about responsibility, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Responsibility for what exactly? She asked. For the impact your narrative has had on people you once called family, he replied. The atmosphere thickened, and Meghan's breath caught as she tried to steady herself. I told my story because no one else would, she said, her tone cold. Maybe, George said slowly, but do you ever wonder if the story you told was the whole story? Meghan's eyes widened. Are you accusing me of lying? She asked. George didn't blink. I'm asking if there were truths you left out. A brief flicker of tension, then Meghan leaned in. Everyone leaves things out, she said, even journalists. George didn't break. True, he replied, but journalists aren't building personal brands out of their stories. Silence settled like ice. So now I'm a brand? Meghan asked. Not a person, not someone who lived through trauma, just marketing? George responded coolly. I think you've mastered the art of turning pain into influence. The room seemed to collectively inhale. Meghan shot back instantly. You're not qualified to measure my pain, George. George's voice remained steady. I'm not measuring the pain. I'm measuring the presentation. Another crack. "This is unbelievable," Meghan whispered. "You came here to corner me, not question me." George leaned back, but his voice remained sharp. "I came here to ask what millions have been wondering, questions you've skillfully avoided by controlling every narrative you tell." Meghan lifted her chin. "I control my voice," she shot back. "Not your narrative, not your spin, not the public's appetite for controversy." George held her gaze, then let the public see her answers without pre-edited context. Meghan froze. For the first time, her confidence wavered. Her composure faltered, but the cameras caught it. "You don't get to define what's real," she said, her voice sharp. "Reality defines itself." The line had been drawn. Meghan glanced away for a split second, then returned with a voice colder than before. "Ask your next question, George." "All right," he replied. "Let's talk about Harry." The room shifted dramatically, and Meghan reacted instinctively, her body language shifting with protective tension. "Don't," she warned, but George wasn't backing down. "Meghan," he said gently, "your story and Harry's story are intertwined. The world can't pretend otherwise." Meghan's jaw clenched, and her voice dropped into a low, steely tone. "He's not here to defend himself," she said, "and I won't let you drag him into this performance." George leaned in, unflinching. "This isn't a performance," he replied. "This is accountability." The room fell completely still. Meghan inhaled sharply. "Accountability," she echoed, "is not what you want. You want someone to blame. You want a headline." George didn't flinch. "I want clarity," he said. "Real clarity." Meghan's eyes flashed with something raw, hurt, fury, exhaustion, all colliding. "You think I control him?" she whispered. George's voice dropped, deliberate and measured. "I think people deserve to know how much of the story is influenced and how much is independent." The line landed like a sharp crack. Meghan's breath caught, but she stood tall. "You don't want the truth," she said. "You want a villain, and you want it to be me." George remained calm. "I want honesty," he answered, "even when it's uncomfortable." Meghan shook her head slowly. "I won't be part of this," she said. "Not this time." And with that, she walked off the set, not in rage, but in a silence so sharp it left a weight in the air. George watched her leave, then turned to the camera with a steady exhale. "We'll be right back." But the world already knew something irreversible had just happened.